It's time for some exercises. In this position, it's white's turn to move. Use your 5-step calculation method and see if you can find a tactic here for white. You can pause the video to think about it. Okay, so the first step is always to find your opponent's threats. Now, our opponent doesn't have any serious threats here. He can't check us anyway, he can't capture one of our pieces. There aren't any serious threats he can make against us. So that gives us liberty to go on to the next step, to identify targets in our opponent's position. Okay, so the first target must be the bishop because we're already attacking the bishop. Another target is this pawn because we're attacking it with the rook as well as the bishop. And of course, the king is also going to be a target because after bishop takes pawn, the king is going to be in check. Okay, now we also want to look at some tactical motives. And an interesting motive we see in this position is we have the option of capturing the bishop, which would force the rook to come onto b7. This is a tactical motive that they call attraction, because you're attracting a piece onto a square where it can become vulnerable. And now the solution becomes quite easy. We only have to look at the checks, and then we see here bishop takes d5 check, and we're going to win the rook, because after the king gets out of check, we get the rook. Okay, so you see in this tactic, you didn't even have to complete all the 5 steps, because before we got to the final steps, we already found the solution. So if that happens, that's fine. The purpose of the calculation process is to help you find tactics. So if you can find a tactic even before the end of the process, then that's great. So let's look at the second example now. Okay, here's the second exercise. In this position, it's black's turn to move. Use your 5-step calculation method and see if you can find a tactic for black. You can pause the video to think about it. Okay, so first of all, we need to find our opponent's threats. And I hope you saw that white is threatening to capture our rook. So whatever we do, we have to consider that we don't want to lose material. White is threatening rook takes f8. There doesn't seem to be any other serious threat that we have to worry about. So while keeping that in mind, we can go on to the next step to identify possible targets. Now, of course, this bishop should be a target because it's unprotected. The moment a piece is undefended, it's always a target because you can easily make a threat against it. The white king should also be a target here because it's easy to check him with the queen. Alright, and if we start looking at motives, we see that by putting the queen on d4, we can actually check the king and attack the undefended bishop at the same time. White has to do something to get out of check and we win the bishop. And as I said in the previous exercise, we don't have to calculate much further here because we found a way to win material, and at the same time we dealt with the threat because that was the bishop that was actually threatening our rook. Alright, let's go to the third and last exercise. In this position, it's white's turn to move. Use your 5-step calculation thinking method and then see if you can find a tactic here for white. You can pause the video to think about it. Okay, so in the first step, you should have looked at black's threats, and it doesn't seem that black has any serious threats, although you did have to calculate some moves here. You had to think about, what about this move if he attacks my queen? You also have to be aware that he can win a pawn here. But that said, black doesn't have any serious threats, and it gives us liberty to start looking for a tactic of our own here. And the second step, of course, is to find the targets. Obviously, this bishop must be a target. Any undefended piece should be regarded as a target because if it's undefended, it's easy to make a threat against it. The king is here definitely a target because he can be checked and possibly with the move queen takes e6 if the queen didn't protect there. Rook f8 is obviously also a target due to the tension between these two rooks. And if we think about the motives, we should think about this idea that I just mentioned, that the queen is the only piece that protects the pawn. So we have a possible deflection. Deflection means you make a piece move away from defending something else. For example, if we play rook takes f8, then the black queen would be forced to capture the rook, and here we can immediately see the solution, because after queen takes rook, queen takes e6 check, the king has to get out of check or block the check, and then they lose the unprotected bishop. Okay, so this shows you the power of the 5-step calculation process. While you do it, you may suddenly discover something interesting, and maybe there's a tactic behind that. And if it works, well then great, then the calculation process helped you found it. Okay, so this is nearing the end now of day 1. I hope you enjoyed it, and tomorrow we're going to be looking at the process of how to evaluate a position. I'm sure you're going to find that interesting too. So I'll see you again then. Cheers.